Hello all, welcome back to Project Mastery Podcast. We'll be covering key points on stakeholder management and one of the tools for stakeholder analysis, namely power interest grid. We all know who stakeholders are. Stakeholders are individuals or organizations whose interests are positively or negatively impacted by the project or product and includes those who will exert a positive or negative influence on the project. A stakeholder can be an individual, it can also be an organization. Stakeholder is going to positively impact the project. Stakeholder is also going to negatively impact the project. He may positively impact the project or he may negatively impact the project. He will also exert a positive influence on the project or a negative influence on the project. Let's say you launch a factory. One section of the society in the neighborhood is happy because they are going to get employment opportunities and they are going to get a regular water supply from a private organization, so they are not worried about the water supply. The other section of the society is completely dependent on the river nearby. They are unhappy that the factory is going to be launched. They are unhappy that this project is going to be launched because it's going to emit chemicals which is going to pollute the nearby river, which is going to impact their regular water intake. And now you understood, like, one stakeholder is positively impacted, the other stakeholder is negatively impacted. There is one more section of society which does not like to have any development in that particular area. Hence, they are going to do some protest and they are going to be against this project coming up. So here you have a stakeholder who is going to negatively impact the project. Stakeholders get identified as part of initiation. Once all the stakeholders are identified, the list is going to be maintained in stakeholder register. For the identified list of stakeholders, one of the primary functions of the project manager is to keep them engaged, to keep them involved in the project. You need to identify all the stakeholders as early as possible in the project. We all know that late changes will bring project delay. Let us assume that you have missed to identify a particular stakeholder and you identify him in the middle of the project and he comes up with a very complex new requirement which is going to bring about a rework in the project. You need to always keep the stakeholders involved in the project. You need to find out what are the requirements. You have to determine the expectations of stakeholders. What do they believe? How do they foresee the future? When the project outcome is delivered, what will the stakeholders think about the outcome? You need to discover their hidden expectations, find out their interest. What is the level of interest the stakeholder has from the project? Does he ignore or care about the project? How much does he care? Are the stakeholders going to be actively or positively engaged in the project? You have to plan your work strategy based on the interest and engagement of the stakeholder. One would be interested in a complex module getting completed. Another is not going to care about any other modules of the particular project. He may not pay attention to any other features of the product. Some stakeholders will be involved during the initiation phase. Some stakeholders are going to be involved during the testing phase of the product. Some would like to be involved only in the detailed phase of the project where they are more interested in details. Some would like to get high level information. What is the level of influence? Are they exerting negative influence or positive influence on the project, like the example we discussed earlier? What is the authority level? What kind of authority they have on the project? How will they impact the work currently performed? How will they impact the out? Let us say that you have a very tough stakeholder, but he is one of the prominent stakeholders. If you are not able to satisfy him, then the project will go for a toss. It is going to create a bad impression. You will lose the client. There are 100 stakeholders, but there are only few stakeholders whom you need to ensure that they are always satisfied. If not, then it is going to create a bad name and there is a possibility the project will come to a closure. So you need to identify who is the highest authority and the most important stakeholder. For them, you're going to follow a different strategy. For other stakeholders, you're going to follow a different strategy. Once you know the interest, expectations, authority, influence level, you need to plan to involve them, engage them. How will you handle communications with them? What information needs to be shared? When it needs to be shared? Do you need to share detailed information or high level information or partial information or complete information or only sensitive information? Or is it okay if they only require a weekly summary report? You need to manage their expectations, you need to manage their influence, you need to manage their engagement. You have to maintain good working relationships throughout the project lifecycle. You have to find out what is the stakeholder specific skill, what is their expertise. Some stakeholders would like to be talked only in the technical language. Some stakeholders would love to be talked about the managerial aspects. You have to create a transparent environment where the stakeholders must be able to come to you comfortably. They should be approaching all the problems that you are facing in the project, any ambiguity, any assumptions. It's a question of trust. You need to maintain a very great relationship with stakeholders, and communication is a very key factor here. Once you have the stakeholders listed in the stakeholder register, you will have to perform stakeholder analysis using one of the tools called Power Interest Grid. Power Interest Grid is a stakeholder analysis tool which helps the project managers classify stakeholders based on their level of power, which is called influence, and interest, which is nothing but the concern or engagement in the project. Power is the ability of a stakeholder to influence project outcomes positively or negatively. Interest is the degree to which a stakeholder is affected by or cares about the project outcome. By categorizing the stakeholders, project manager can apply the right engagement strategy. You as a project manager needs to ensure effective communication. You have to minimize conflicts, which will result in higher project success. You as a project manager needs to apply the right strategy for the right stakeholders. Now if you look into this grid, it is split into different quadrants. One quadrant is talking about high power plus high interest. Let's check this quadrant. This quadrant says high power plus high interest, meaning stakeholders who have been grouped in this quadrant need to be managed closely. These stakeholders are critical to project success. Example, sponsor, steering committee and key customers. Let us take an example of a banking project. For a banking project, you will have CEOs, board of directors, project sponsors, CIOs, CTOs, key regulators like RBI in India. All these are all stakeholders with high power and high interest. They are all critical to project success. For example, they would be directly accountable for project success. They are the ones who are going to approve the budgets and they are the ones who will provide strategic directions. They can even penalize if complaints failures happen. They can even halt the project. The strategy that you use to deal with these stakeholders could be weekly executive dashboards, steering committee reviews, complaints updates. You will involve them in risk decisions, example data security, regulatory deadlines. You need to ensure transparency is there. You will actively engage them throughout the project lifecycle. You're going to provide them frequent updates. You're going to manage their expectations directly. You're going to involve them directly in decision making. We move on to the next quadrant, which is called high power plus low interest. Individuals who are grouped under high power plus low interest, we are going to keep them satisfied. They are going to have high level of authority, but they are going to have low interest in the project. They are all influential stakeholders, but not highly involved in day-to-day details. Example, regulatory bodies, senior executives outside project scope. If you take up the banking example, you can consider chief risk officer is powerful but not interested in daily system details. You can consider audit committee who will care about governance but not coding or testing. You will consider some major shareholders who will influence funding but not day-to-day interest. For these stakeholders who are in this quadrant, you will provide quarterly updates with risk or complaint summaries. You will assure them the project won't threaten bank reputation or compliance. You are not going to overload with technical details. You only keep it at a strategic level. You are going to provide summaries. You will avoid overwhelming them. You will ensure they are satisfied so they don't become blockers. Moving on to the next quadrant, which talks about low power and high interest. It is talking about stakeholders who will have the lowest level of authority but they are going to have high interest in the project. You need to keep them informed. Stakeholders who care deeply but don't have major influence. Example, end users, team members, functional staff. If you take the banking example, we can say branch managers and operation team. They are going to be directly affected since system impacts daily work for them. You will have customer service representatives. For example, frontline staff, they care about usability. You will have retail and corporate customers, pilot users, who will have high interest in system performance. What is the strategy that you will use to deal with these kind of stakeholders? You will conduct training sessions, you will use feedback loops, you will do pilot rollouts, you will send regular newsletters, question and answer sessions, change management workshops, empower them to give feedback. You're going to provide regular communication to them. You'll be providing them progress updates, feedback opportunities. They can become advocates if engaged properly. Moving on to the last quadrant, which talks about low power and low interest, meaning these stakeholders will have low level of authority and they're going to have low interest in the project. For these stakeholders, you're going to monitor them. Minimum effort is what is going to be utilized in engaging them. These stakeholders will have little influence and limited concern. Let's take an example here. Peripheral vendors or minor support staff. If you take up the banking example, we're talking about minor vendors. Example, office supply, small IT support. Or it could be temporary contractors not tied to system rollout. Or it could be general public with no direct interaction. Stakeholders who are grouped in this particular quadrant, what is the strategy to be used? You are going to monitor them occasionally, provide essential information only. You don't invest significant resources to deal with these stakeholders. You will share essential announcements only. Monitor passively to ensure they don't become unexpected risk. You're going to monitor passively only with the purpose of ensuring that they are not going to become risky in future for us. This particular tool is used in stakeholder analysis process where you identify stakeholders as part of initiation and then you're going to plan the stakeholder engagement as part of planning. This will feed into the stakeholder register and the stakeholder engagement plan from a PMBOK perspective. This tool is going to be very useful for the project manager as project manager needs to prioritize limited time and resources on the stakeholders that matter most. You need to devote your time and resources for the most essential stakeholders. you're going to ensure that principles like value delivery and stakeholder satisfaction are always met. We have understood how stakeholders play a very important role in project delivery, and it's a responsibility of the project manager to continuously keep them engaged throughout the life cycle of the project. And there are multiple tools available to analyze the stakeholders. One of the tools that we understood is the Power Integrate. We have come to the end of this episode. Hope the knowledge was valuable. Thank you for tuning in.